to prayer and quick pledge. Father, thank you for this chance that we have to come together. We thank you for what you're doing in this community. We ask your blessings on this council and this entire community. Amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Not to start the meeting off, I know we'll talk about this at the main meeting, but I know our thoughts and prayers are continually with the Huda family. And then also there was just an announcement, I think less than an hour ago, that there was a crash in Smyrna at the air show. And so it is confirmed that one of the pilot is deceased. So our thoughts and prayers have reached out to Mayor Reed, and she said that they're handling everything. So our thoughts and prayers are with them. Mr. Lyons, we'll turn over the budget discussion to you.
Yes, sir. Mayor and Council, as you know, we've had 2 budget review sessions. As is typical during budget, there are some items that come to staff's attention that we wanted to update you on. I was going to walk quickly through those with you. And as a reminder, each year we don't make any changes to the budget at this meeting. We've got a budget public hearing scheduled for 7 p.m. So once the budget public hearing was concluded, that would be the appropriate time to make any of the changes that you would like to have. So I've got a couple things that I will run through, and then we'll turn it over to the council and see what other changes you might have in the budget. This year we did have changes to general fund revenues totaling a little more than $430,000. This is primarily due to, I think we were a little too conservative on our building and codes estimates. Clearly the activity in the construction and building in the city is at a rapid pace, so we did find some room there to increase general fund revenues. And also there was some additional grant money received for Rover that would come from both, I think, federal and state, both federal and state government. And there was a little bit of a $5,000 donation from Coca-Cola at Bloomfield Links as a donation. So those would be the changes we found thus far on revenue. So let me pause there, see if there are any other questions on the revenue side.
So you've got 2 changes on the revenue side.
Okay. Then there were some corrections identified on the expenditure side. Some of these we mentioned to you during the budget presentation. One was in the planning department. The planning staff is clearly quite busy these days. They needed an additional administrative support specialist. That's a position where the salary starts at $24,000. Mr. Whitaker is going to be remodeling the planning space in part to make the building more secure. The second floor is open, so we think by closing it off, it'll keep people from wandering down the hall. But also, with that remodel, we'll have one person up front that really will be a person at the meet and greet visitors and kind of organize the flow of traffic in and out of the department. So the planning changes listed for you in there. And the police department, in our transition from one software program to the new one, we inadvertently omitted the police officers who were retired. So that correction is before you. And the next change deals with the Safe Streets program. At the time the automated traffic enforcement program was approved, you all asked for how would we use those funds. And so the police chief has developed some funding for advertising, education, the purchase of some speed trailers. We put those out in the community to advise motorists that they're driving too fast, and also 2 motorcycles, and those are used exclusively on traffic. So we feel that those changes will meet the need to help us increase safety on our city streets. The purchasing department will be fully staffed, and we felt like we needed to add some additional money for salaries and then also some membership dues, travel, mobile phone, and IT expenses. That'll get that department fully staffed and up and going. Transportation, we had mentioned to you that the department had been relying heavily on part-time drivers. This had caused us some problems completing the schedule and working our part-time employees more hours than was desirable. So we want to convert 2 of the part-time transit operators to full-time. So some of the part-time expense will go down, and the increase would be in the difference. And then they also needed an administrative support person. The administrative support personnel that I just mentioned also will go to help support the IT department. IT could use some administrative help. Mr. Lilly had asked for an additional person. I believe with the addition of these 2, we should find some capacity to help Mr. Lilly's department out as well. The question was asked about our tree climber. We had tried several times to try to fill that position, and we're unsuccessful. On the class and comp plan, Council approved a policy on positions that are defined as hard to fill, that we can actually increase the maximum salary offered. So we really want to try a 2-pronged approach. One is to go back out on the market with a higher salary, see if that brings some personnel to us. What we're finding is that other local governments tend to rely on contract labor, and so we're going to work with Ms. Holloway to put together a bid specification to try to secure some private services as well, and see if one of those 2 approaches can give us the help that she needs in her department. And I think the next change I had for you were reclassifications. The reclassifications are going to be where positions with the city was taking on additional duties and responsibility. That's more territory, not just busy, not just more projects, but assumed new functional responsibility. And so there are 4 of those that are outlined in my letter to you. And those were the changes, Mayor and Council, that I had identified in working with staff since the budget had been prepared. And I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Do you want to go on into, do you guys want to let him go all the way through each individual item, or do you want to, is there certain items you want to discuss under those?
I can continue and then turn it over to you because there's just a few other items that had changed.
I think that'd be good. Okay.
The debt service fund, we had omitted a transfer that would reduce the use of fund balance by the same amount. That was $50,000. And in the airport fund, Mr. Gerke was able to find some additional federal grants that would also cause there was going to be an addition of fund balance of $38,000, but the addition of the grant revenue and then the related expense will actually cause us to use about $4,000 from fund balance.
Okay.
Those were the corrections that staff had identified, Mayor.
I'm going to make notes, but council members, you've got several items that I know that we were going to discuss. So I think I'm going to just throw a couple out that I know we were planning on discussing, and the first one would be hotel motel tax. So to get opinions of the council on the hotel motel tax. No need to, might as well just pick one and let's go to it, right?
Yeah. How much revenue is the proposed increase supposed to bring us, as well as the part that we give back to the Tourism Bureau or CVB or whatever?
Hold that number real quick, because
I think it was saying we were going to go from, I don't know about our revenue number, but one of the things that stuck out to me was that in the outside agencies report, I think it had us going from 380,000 to CVB to 760.
correct.
That would be sticking with the 30% rule. Is that right?
So let me maybe kind of back up and just kind of go big picture on the hotel motel tax, and then come back to the amount of the increase. In the state of Tennessee, the city is authorized to levy a 5% hotel motel tax. At the time it was approved, I think it was 1.5%, and then a few years later it was moved up to 2.5%. It's been 2.5%, I believe, since 1983. So this tax rate has not gone up in that time. In the state of Tennessee, hotel guests also pay state sales tax. Of course, we don't have income tax here, and the state of Tennessee relies certainly on the sales tax. I did send you a report that was done by TASA, the Tennessee Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, a few weeks ago that did a comprehensive analysis in 2015 on hotel motel taxes, both the structure, the legislative authority, and then some survey information about other cities and what their tax rates are. In the surrounding area, we've got Franklin and Brentwood at 8%, Chattanooga is at 8%, Knoxville is at 8%, Memphis is at 6.7%, and Nashville charges a 6% fee, but then adds a $2.50 flat charge on each room rate. That was approved at the time Nashville made the decision to build the Music City Center, and we've certainly seen tourism in Nashville. I believe it was recently named a top 10 destination, so Nashville certainly flourished from the increased tourism, and honestly, I believe Murfreesboro has been the beneficiary of that. Room rates in Nashville are higher than they are in Murfreesboro, and I know in talking to some of the groups and associations, they're choosing some of the suburban communities like Murfreesboro, Franklin, to locate their annual conferences or state association meetings because the overall cost to a convention is less here. So
if, Mr. Lyons, if we look at, you said Nashville is 6.6%?
6% plus $2.50 flat rate per room night.
And Williamson County, 8. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that for Williamson County? Is that you said Franklin?
They,
is that
yeah,
Franklin and Williamson County combined?
Yeah. Thank you for getting me to clarify that. When I read the TASA report, they talked about hotel motel rates in Tennessee can be stacked. That is, the city charges a hotel motel tax and the county charges a hotel motel tax. Murfreesboro is a stacked community. We charge 2.5%. Rutherford County had been charging 2.5%, but the county commission just recently moved theirs from 2.5% to 5%. So in Franklin and Brentwood, the county's charging 4% and the city's charging 4%. So it's a combined 8%.
Mr. Lyons, the county in their proposal is going to raise their share of that hotel tax. Is that correct?
I don't know if it's been voted on by the full commission. I believe the budget committee recommended the additional 2.5% to get Rutherford County to a 5% hotel motel tax rate.
And all we could really do is raise it another 2.5%.
That, under the law that gave the city the ability to charge hotel motel tax, yes, sir.
2.5% more than
that's what we're
doing
capped
now.
at.
And you say it hadn't been raised since 1983?
I believe so.
Were you born then, Mayor?
Doogie.
Now there is a fundamental difference in the proposal from Rutherford County and the city. The city has earmarked, even though it's not in the legislation, we've earmarked 30% of our hotel motel tax proceeds to the Convention and Visitors Bureau. Rutherford County has also done that historically. However, Mayor Burgess's proposal that was discussed by the Budget Committee was going to take all of the new money and steer it into the general fund, I think primarily for the fire protection in Rutherford County.
Okay, I hope my head isn't blinding anybody out there, but I'm going to continue. My understanding is that the Embassy Suites Convention Center is almost full all the time, and that there is a plan when it was built to blow it out and make it larger. Would some of this money collected from this go to help do that?
I think perhaps indirectly, Mr. Young, the 30% that we earmarked for the Convention and Visitors Bureau, so this year I think we budgeted $400,000. They use that to help get the tournaments. They use that for spring fling, TSSAA type events. And they've been very successful.
Also, the recreation director tells me that he has to turn down tournaments because he doesn't have enough parks.
So part of perhaps my analysis on the hotel motel tax, we're earmarking 30% directly to the Convention and Visitors Bureau. You know, the balance of the money, we have been very aggressive in funding the kinds of facilities that attract tourists, be it Cannonsburg, the ball fields, the Siegel Soccer Complex, and most recently the Adams Tennis Center. Additionally, about 6-7 years ago, the city directly funded the land purchase for the conference center at the Embassy project. We bought the land for $5.5 million, deeded it to the IDB, who turned around and then leased it to Mr. Hammonds for $1 a year for 15 years. So we've definitely stepped up to help bring the tourism. And it's been great for our community. It's been good for our restaurants. It's been good for the hotels. You can see the number of hotels that are being constructed in and around the Embassy and along Thompson Lane and elsewhere in the community that have been very successful.
So I looked it up in the budget. It looks like it's our budgeted increase would be right at about $1 million as far as our revenue increase. Went from about $1.5 million to $2.5 million. What I'm kind of, first of all, I'll tell you, I'm not a big fan of doubling it. I've been that way from the beginning, and we don't get a chance to talk about this. So I think, anytime you put yourself in a position to double a tax on our businesses is a bad idea if we can avoid it. Now, as far as the revenue goes, because I'm skeptical on the budget as a whole, it's hard to give up $1 million in revenue. So one thing I'm curious about is whether or not it's really necessary or appropriate for us to be given $750,000 to the CVB. Do they really need twice as much money along with us building the Adams Tennis Complex and building the parks and buying the parks and staffing the parks and doing all the stuff that we're doing with Cannonsburg? And, we're already spending that money to get people here. How important is it for us to give them $750,000 instead of $380,000?
I did ask Mr. Latour, president of the chamber, what would the plan be for the additional proceeds? He felt like there could be an increased focus with additional staff to lure additional association events, but also importantly, and it's something we've heard as well, and that is to focus on the heritage tourism. We've got a historic downtown. We've got events like Uncle Dave Macon Days. What else can we do to help bring more of the heritage tourism type events? So I think part of the money, Mr. LaLance, would go to that additional staff to help them find more events to come here.
I think my general thoughts on it, I'll just get this out here, is that going from 2.5% to 5%, I don't think I'll support that. But, something to the effect of going from 2.5% to 3.5%, and maybe even conceivably moving that 30% number to 25 would still be a significant increase to the amount that we're giving to the CVB. I just don't know that we need to be doubling taxes. I don't know that we need to be doubling the amount that we give to them with all the other money that we're spending to promote what we're doing. I'm not going to be able to support it. I guess I'll just put it to you that way. We'll get this out on the table, and unless you give me some information I don't already know, and I'm certainly open, but that's kind of how I feel about it for now.
Let me speak to a concern that was mentioned in Mr. Lyons' comment that I'm particularly sensitive to, because I think we have done an excellent job of supporting tournaments and sporting events to come to our community, and the CDB has done a wonderful job of that. But there is, these tourist dollars are good dollars. A lot of things we don't educate their children. You've heard the whole comment before. But we have a resource here in our community that has kind of sat on the table for a long time, and the historic value of our community, to tell that story and to provide for a whole new tourist, or for those people that are coming for these tournaments, to have something to do while they're here. I think the venues and the events need some coordination. They've for too long kind of been sitting in the background, doing their own thing to kind of tell their story, whether it be Bradley Academy, Oakland's, the different, all of the events. There's a historic story of our community that needs to be told and could be leveraged into significant dollars, tourist dollars.
And I don't know what you do when most of us go to a place. I want to know the story of the community. And to me, this is an opportunity, could be an opportunity. Whatever additional dollars that we raise, I don't think need to go telling the same story or to the same direction that we've been spending our dollars in. We've done a good job of doing that, but there's an additional thing. This is new ground we could claim, new tourists, leverage that opportunity to our community if we direct the Chamber and the CDB to do something different, to be creative in these additional dollars and not just do the same thing. I think we could really benefit our hotel motel industry, the hospitality industry. We could put more heads in beds, the things that they're looking to do. This might not be a negative for them. It actually could be a positive. So anyway, I'd at least like, when I first we talked about this, I thought, well, this is an opportunity, not necessarily a negative. And I would like us to explore that and not just write a bigger check to the Chamber and say, do with what you're going to do, what you want to do with it, but to kind of help them see that there might be appropriate for them to try to plow a new field of tourism in our community. So there's my 2 cents worth too. And whether it be 1% or 2.5%, I think we ought to, any additional revenue that we do give to them ought to be directed as opposed to just a bigger check and say, y'all figure it out.
Mr. Smotherman.
I think the worst, absolute worst explanation you can give for increasing a tax is based on the fact that we haven't done it in a long time. The fact that it hadn't been increased in 28 years is completely irrelevant when you're talking about a percentage. Because if you go back to what a hotel room would have cost 28 years ago versus what that room costs today, that 2.5% number that we currently charge is dramatic over what it would have been at that time. I mean, so has there been an increase? Yes, absolutely. Every time that they've had a room rate increase, there has been an increase in the amount that we've received from them. So we have probably increased that tax every single year. Do we need more tourism? Driving the streets of Murfreesboro currently, I'd say our capacity is pretty darn close to what we can handle. The roads are full, and I'm excited when people come to town and visit, but there has to be a number that you say enough is enough, and tourism dollars are great dollars, there's no doubt. But when somebody comes to visit me, I hope the bottom line for me is I will treat them the same way that I would be treated when I went to visit them. And at the end of the day, I think if you start gouging people that visit you, you have the wrong approach to treating your tourist. I'll be opposed to it completely.
I think there's got to be, give my 2 cents worth, I think there's got to be a good mix. I think I don't want to throw the county under the bus because they've got a tough job that they have to deal with, but I do think that there could have been a better way to handle the whole process by meeting with stakeholders, by talking about what was going to happen as opposed to the way it was handled. And I'm leaning more towards, we spend $12 million or $13 million a year this year on Parks and Recreation. So I think the one thing that it's hard for the hotel motel industry not to argue with, that we've put our money where our mouth is to be able to bring tournaments and venues into this city. We've got over 300 people, counting part-time people, who are working within the city for Parks and Rec. You go every weekend, there's people working on the ball fields, the soccer fields. Mr. Goodwin sent a thing yesterday that Borough Beach broke the record for Memorial Day, and I'm sure that some of those were out of town guests. Mm-hmm. We spent $5.5 million to even get the conference center or Embassy Suites here. So that was the catalyst, and we bought the land to do that. And, you know, I think that the one thing we look to is, and we made this comment with the hotel motel industry when we met with them, the hotel motel industry doesn't keep their rates the same year round. When these events come in, the room rates go up. And, you know, we're used to that. So, you know, if it's spring fling, I guarantee you the spring fling rate last week was more expensive than it is this weekend with no one inside, no one here. Now, you're right, we do collect more money when they raise the rates. So I'm leaning more towards, you know, one thing I will put, we keep hearing this number that we're going to have a 20% sales tax or a hotel motel tax, and that's just
Totally wrong.
that's not right. That includes sales tax. And so that's like saying that, you know, when I buy a car that has a wholesale price on it, that I'm going to throw every tax that there possibly is into it. So, you know, I think that we just have to look, what's the hotel motel tax? And so part of it, I understand, is making your argument, and my concern is perception is reality. And if the hotel motel industry is publicizing that we have the highest tax rate in the country, which is not the case, then that's going to hurt our business. And I don't want that to happen. So what I would like to see is that we maybe do something to study over the next several months to say, look, this is where we need to be. This is what could be the impact, and determine from there. And at the same time, see what the county has done to us on the rate increase that they've done this year. So I'm with you, Rick. I don't think that doubling it is the rate, but at the same time, I also don't think that we can continue to increase our parks and recreation venues with the amount that we're looking at spending those and bringing in more and more tourist dollars, and there not be some kind of partnership that we try to figure out. So I guess I'm not for doubling the hotel tax. I don't think that would be prudent at this point.
And I agree with the comments that have been made. When we look at increases, a lot of times I think, kind of go overboard on increases, whether we double it or triple it or whatnot. But I'm looking at the bottom line also, that we're looking at money going out of families' pockets, and, you know, we're talking about Murfreesboro being a great attraction for tourism, and we're doing good because our hotels and motels are staying full. We're making millions of dollars on the spring fling, and a lot of families are barely making it now. And so when they travel and have to pay these high prices when they don't have to, I agree that's something we just have to look at and look at the bottom line. We're still looking at money coming out of people's pockets. And if we don't have to make that increase like that, I don't see a need to.
And I guess part of my point would be, Madeline, to follow up on what you're saying, I mean, if we're going to target the hotel industry, who do we target next? I mean, do we go after, you know, somebody who's go after all the restaurants and start charging them a fee and have that added on to the price because everybody who comes as a tourist goes to our restaurants and eat? I mean, where do you stop? I mean, there seems to be this justification of just because somebody's visiting you, you have a right to reach deeper into their pocket. And that whole philosophy troubles me.
I do think it could be something that we look at, that compare ourselves to what the market is around us. You know, I mean, I think that's what most businesses would do is you're comparing to what your competition is doing, and if we're way above our competition, then that's something that we need to address. But if we're not the same as our competition, then that may be something that we address later on down the line.
And if the county does what they say they're going to do or have implied that they're going to do, that's going to get us at 7.5%. If Williamson County's at 8%, we would still have a slight competitive advantage over Williamson County if we do nothing on the city side. But at some point, it does come down to who's got the low bid. And when you're out shopping around for rooms or shopping around for, I would say that the average person who's traveling with one family down the road probably does very little shopping to see what the hotel tax is going to be when you're going to Fort Lauderdale or Miami or wherever you're going to visit. But the at the end of the day, you are reaching into their pocket and taking more of their money. But if I were looking at a bottom line and said, okay, I've got a ball team and I'm carrying there, and there's X number of rooms that we've got to have, and that number starts multiplying, then I think at some point when you say, okay, where we're going to stay will be based on low bid, you could miss out on it with 2 hotel rooms that are exact same price in Murfreesboro and the same price in Franklin, just on the virtue of we raised it 2.5%. And I just...
Let me just add a little bit more information. So if you look at when you bid for, when a hotel bids for that, sometimes you're going to get a reduced rate anyway for the group rate. So you're not going to pay, and if they want that business, they would competitively bid their room rate down so they could get that business. So, I mean...
And then you're taking it away from the business. If he has to reduce his rate even lower to get below what Williamson County would be charging, then you're taking it away from your business person.
But that's kind of the way business functions. I mean, I understand what you're saying, that it's appreciate the value of an independent business, but let me speak to a little piece of the money. What that money does is generate continued the sustainability and the viability of those, and the marketability of those events and those things that draw people to our area. We're fortunate that when we have an event like Spring Fling, those businesses that come don't have a choice. They're going to come to Murfreesboro because of the event that is here. What I think might be the opportunity is for us to create something that if Spring Fling happens to find another venue and go somewhere else at some point in time, we still have a story to tell of our community where tourism needs to be nurtured and encouraged, and the story needs to be told. And there are people, there are events, there are venues that are having a difficult time sustaining their presence in our community. You may or may not be aware of that, but there are folks that are having difficulty sustaining those events. So to me, to have tourists and that tourist dollar help to sustain that presence in our community is a good thing. It's not a bad thing, and it's not gouging. In my estimation, it's not gouging to get to use dollars of those people that are coming in. At some point, it may not be double. It may not be that 2.5 is a realistic way of looking at it, but at an increase. But some dollars attributed to leveraging that perspective and those tourist opportunities in our community, that business focused towards that is extremely important to me in the long-term viability of our community. Just sitting here and expecting it to happen, it doesn't happen without a whole lot of help. And sometimes this is a place, this is where some dollars reside that could help sustain them. And I don't necessarily see it and view it as gouging. I've got to say that. I think that's unfair to say that when cities decide to fund, we have very few revenue sources and streams that are given to us by the state. And to use those properly is part of our responsibility, the way I look at it. You can't just say we don't do that anymore, or we back off of that, because I think those are the streams that we do use to raise money.
Mayor, if a hotel charges $100 a night per room, and we go up to double, which is what you're saying, which sounds outrageous, but it's really only $2.50 a night additional per room that the city's charging. So to say $2.50 on a room rate is gouging, to me, is ludicrous. Also, we don't figure in all the infrastructure that we have to pay for. Roads and police and fire, all this goes into the general budget, but it all goes in and it's all spent. So I don't think it's gouging at 2.5 per increase. I don't think that if the motel people will tell you that it's going to hurt their industry. But that's just my opinion.
It seems to me like there's a lot of angles to this that really, you know, we haven't really discussed until tonight, which is the night we're dealing with this budget. So I don't know if this is what you were sort of alluding to or not, but, you know, I really don't know. We can't make changes apparently till later or whatever, but, you know, I mean, maybe what I think this, you know, my take from this discussion is we need to shelve it and figure out if there's some, you know, whether or not we get some increase, and then, you know, this goes back to some of the discussions we've had in the past, which is kind of more of the big picture stuff. You know, what are we doing with the money? Why, you know, I mean, it's not necessarily, I mean, I don't think everybody who'd be opposed to this thinks we're just trying to gouge them. I certainly don't think it's an attempt to gouge somebody. I just think it's probably, you know, here's the deal. It is true what Eddie says as far as the room rate going up. I mean, this is math. We have increased the tax. You know, it's just like property taxes. No, we haven't increased the rate, but the amount of property tax we get off the same house 30 years ago as to today is definitely higher because of the appraised value. So it's a similar thought process that we are getting more for year over year, the same, you know, on an, you know, the same number of hotel rooms. We get more this year than we did 5 or 10 years ago, just based on we get 2.5% of a larger number. So we have been able to grow that way. The number of rooms has also grown significantly. I suspect if you looked at what our hotel tax revenue was, our room occupancy rate tax 10 years ago, it's nowhere close to $1.5 million, which is what it is this year. I suspect it's significantly lower. And so, you know, to me, do I think $2.50 is going to change whether or not somebody comes? I don't know. It might affect somebody, you know, in some kind of bidding situation. Yeah. Should we generally, for me, I was looking at the double idea from a bigger picture perspective. Should we ever be in a position where we are putting ourselves in a position to have to double it? You know, I mean, if we haven't needed to raise it for the last 30 years, why all of a sudden do we need to double it? That's kind of that was sort of my take on it, is that we shouldn't, it doesn't seem like we would need to double it. And even if we did, do we need to be sending $750,000 to the CVB? Or what literally would they do with $350,000 extra dollars where we could look at that as an investment for the citizens of Murfreesboro, that we're going to get that back and then some? I mean, maybe we can, but we haven't been shown that, or don't think we've had time. So anyway, I'm a broken record. Let's, you know, can we shelve it?
Well, could we do this, Mr. Lyons, and I think this may be something that, if it would be acceptable to the council members, you know, I think we've had a history of not rushing into decisions, that we've been prudent, and we've even talked about this, about MED, about when, you know, we pride our boards and commissions that we get information not hours before meetings. We get those to be able to study those. And would it be possible, Mr. Lyons, that we can keep this dialogue open for the next couple of months, and let us as city council, maybe if we even have a special workshop to talk about this, to where we can look at what the financial impact is, and then if that's something mid-year that we decide, you know, there needs to be an adjustment, then can we do that if we make a revenue adjustment mid-year?
Absolutely. We're glad to work with you, and, you know, if we want to put together some additional study material, we're more than happy to have that conversation.
Yeah, I think it would be great to have that, you know, single discussion.
We're actually an open mic. I noticed we've got a couple people coming to speak to us on the hotel motel tax. Now, I'm assuming that maybe they're from the hotel industry, so we may get some feedback even in the next few minutes to give us a feel for how the hotels actually feel about this. I don't think there's quite as much love for it as some of you might feel like there is, but
And I want us to keep it, as we discuss and go through all of this, keep it very reasonable if we do anything, because we have to realize everybody that stay in hotels are not staying for pleasure. You know, some people have to go to hotels. Like when I had to go to Mayo, and I spent 29 nights in a hotel, and my hotel ran me $154 a night plus tax. So, you know, I was so poor I couldn't hardly pay attention at Mayo. I mean, I mean, so we have to keep all of these things into consideration why people go to hotels. It's not only for pleasure, so we need to consider all that when we are looking at it.
Okay.
Mr. Lyons sent us a TASER report on this that was done in 2015. I've read a lot of it in the last couple of days, and so I would commend, if you haven't had a chance to look at that TASER report, to look over it, because it does, and it seems to be, it's not slanted towards communities charging more hotel motel tax. It does kind of give you both sides of the equation. So and listening to the hospitality industry is certainly very important for us to do. And if we were, I just wanted to get this out here, is that if we were only going to write a bigger check to the CDB and say, continue doing what you're doing, just have more money to do it, I wouldn't support it. I couldn't support that. If we're going to do something, a totally different initiative that brings, that enhances our tourism industry and brings more people to our community and puts tourists in our community, then I could support something to be increased. But I'm fine with what we're doing. But I would commend that to you if you haven't had a chance to look at it. Look at that TASER report. It has some pretty good information in it.
Okay.
And I don't guess there's any point where you'd ever say we've got too much money. I mean, I think there's always that philosophical approach, especially from government, that the more we get, the more we can spend, and the better everybody will be. I'm not sure I'm buying into that. As a conservative, I can absolutely tell you that's not my belief. I believe the more money we leave in that person's pocket, the more that they're going to spend when they're in town on sales tax, and we'll get a lot more out of sales tax on them than we will to the $2.50 if we just get them here. And so I think that you're walking a very fine line when you start deciding whether or not somebody's going to come to your city and stay there, when you look at all the money that you make off of them once they get to town. But
All right, let's move. So as we talk about well, I'll leave it to each council member. So that was the first one to get out of the way. But what other things would you like to discuss?
if we could go back to the tree climber situation. I know we've discussed the potentially having it contracted out, or whether or not the rate needs to be raised. I looked at the numbers and I've forgotten what the number was. Can you remind me, Rob, of what it is that we're proposing that we pay for the tree climber at this point?
We would advertise up to the entire pay range. So we would advertise at $27,874 to a maximum of $40,808. So it'd be about just under $41,000 a year. And we've not advertised at that level before. So since we've not been successful, this does meet the definition of hard to fill. We could advertise all the way up to that rate and see if we can get somebody.
Ms. Holloway, do you think that we could hire somebody or get somebody to put in for it that would be qualified to do it at that rate?
I certainly hope so. And I've expressed my concerns to Rob. I think it will take going all the way up to the top level, and that person will be at that point topped out or very close to it. My question would be, what do you offer them past that? You know, them looking at a topped out position. The industry would dictate that it would definitely probably take that to get someone.
Yeah, and that's my assumption is with that rate there, obviously the bottom of that scale is completely out of the question because nobody's put in for it, nobody's qualified for it up until this point. It's in that bottom of the scale. Mm-hmm. If that's the case, obviously we have benefits and stuff like that, and I know that some cities contract it out and pay at a rate of around, is it $200 per day?
No, it's usually about $60 a man hour.
Okay.
And they'll run a full crew. So it's very expensive to outsource tree work.
I just don't know that outsourcing it would be advantageous to us when we could up it slightly more, get a trained employee and have somebody. It's that management and control, I think, issue that I feel like you lose when you start contracting out your employees. And
Our preference would be to hire someone. I
Right.
think
That
the
is the
difficulty
preference,
is
to hire someone.
that there just aren't very many out there. You know, they're sometimes making $250 and $300 per day, and so they've stayed, you know, in the private sector. And when HR did try to look at, you know, some of the other local governments, they just weren't having very much success in finding other communities that had actually hired tree climbers. So, small population of, you know, potential applicants is certainly coming into play here. We would like to try, you know, going up and advertising at a much higher salary than we have been to see if we can get somebody. We prefer having our own employee where they're under our supervision.
but we're willing to hire them at the very top of the scale already. Is that what you're saying?
It would be up
I mean-
to, yeah, we would advertise it up to that, and we would see what, you know, the applicant brought us. It's not saying it's a guaranteed whoever walks in the door is going to get 40,000. We'll look to see where they're at and what kind of skills and experience they have, but, you know,
Yeah,
for the right person.
I don't think you're going to get anybody for less than that, I'll be honest with you, as long as we've looked at it, as much as I've researched the backside of it, trying to figure out why we haven't gotten anybody. You know, it's,
HR and Urban Environmental have worked hard to try to
Can
find
I ask a
somebody.
question? How do people get the skill to be a tree climber? I mean, how do you qualify to be is there a class, a school? Or?
Yes, it is a skilled profession, and Davie offers typically a 2-year. It's a 2-year program. It's a skilled labor, you know, highly skilled position.
Is there someone in our department that could go through this training, and we could pay for this training, that we could move them up to this competency? Is there something that we could provide as an incentive for our employees, existing
Well,
employees?
there's nothing locally, really. So most of those applicants that are going to come to us are either probably in the Nashville area and already trained, and we actually need somebody who can climb. Our 2 groundsmen are fabulous. They're very capable, and they've been carrying the load for almost 2 years now. But again, we've had to sub out quite a bit of the heavy work, the skilled work, and to give them an incentive, they would have to leave our employment to get that. It's a highly skilled profession, and neither one of our groundsmen climbs. They can obviously run the aerial bucket truck, but a 2-man crew is not ideal, and we need at a minimum 3. And, you know, for instance, I picked up the phone and called Chattanooga. They're a population of about 180,000. They have 12 people dedicated to just tree work alone. 12 in Chattanooga. And they do it all in-house. They did farm some of it out, but they found inconsistency. The control was gone. We've talked to large companies. To come out of Nashville at a minimum would be 2.5 to 3 hours response time, when hopefully if we can get somebody here and get them employed, our response time is usually, by the time you call them in, get the trucks rigged, it's, you know, right at probably an hour. So we're very hopeful that we can get somebody and it will take that high dollar to get them here. I guess my concern is, you know, if they ask, well, what's after that? I think we're in year 1 of the implementation of the JAQ and that, and it would be 2018 before the 3-year review process. So they would just be getting cost of living raises or percent raises after that. So I do have a concern with that, and it may matter to some and it may not to others. So my preference is to hire, and my preference would be to expand, you know, the employees too at some point for the tree work.
I think that it's clear what we need to do is raise the.
And Mr. Lyons has already, he has approved that. We just haven't gotten around, it's the process of getting it advertised. So he has approved that we can go to that highest level.
I hope we can find somebody for that.
I do too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to nominate Mr. Lance to apply for the job to be a tree climber. I think it'd be great.
I can do it.
You're probably a little old. So. All right. Other items to discuss? Outside agencies? Do you have any outside agencies that you want to discuss? That's in your supplemental book. He's sick.
Because he was here.
Okay, any outside agencies, changes?
Is this the time we propose changes in the amounts, or when do you want to do that?
It's up to you. I know once the public hearing's over, that's when we would be, getting the motions and the seconds. If there were other pieces of information you want to ask about, it's however you want to handle it. I'm at your disposal.
I think, Mr. Shacklet, what may be good, if we've got changes, we could go ahead and get those changes. We could talk about those. Go ahead and get those changes prepared so that way, if whenever it came time after the public hearing, that could be included in the budget, and then we would know what the changes are going to be.
I did. Just no votes on them, but if
No
you wanted
votes,
to,
yeah.
if you wanted to vocalize those, that would be
Yeah.
that would be fine.
Well, I have a list.
All right.
of suggestions. And what was formerly the youth orchestra, I had proposed that we increase theirs from $7,500 to $10,000.
What number is that on the list,
It
Mr.?
is 19.
Okay.
Number 20, I would propose that we fulfill Oakland's request for $20,000. Special Olympics, Murfreesboro Symphony, I was proposing $15,000 instead of the $12,500. For let's see, number 24, Folkloric Society, their request was $3,000. I am proposing that we raise that $500. The Dr. Martin Luther King Scholarship, they'd requested $8,000, and I would propose increasing that $2,000. The Boys and Girls Club from $6,000 to $7,500.
Aaron, are you keeping score? You keeping score?
I'll get all of mine in here, and then we can talk. I was proposing Second Harvard Food Bank to $5,000 instead of the $2,500. Read to Succeed from $6,000 to $7,500. Animal Humane, Jesse Beasley, Animal Humane, to fulfill their $3,000 request. Greenhouse Ministries, from the $5,000 that was granted to $10,000. The Transit, number 50, the Transit Alliance, granting their request. for 5,000. And in new request number 52, the Journey Home, we can, 2,500 for that. And let's see. I'd ask a question about the Homeless Alliance of Rutherford County. I don't know, I was concerned about that being a budget item because that is either you do it or you don't do it. But could you speak a little bit about what their request was about? So.
Sure. Typically, the outside agencies are just that. They're organizations in our community that provide services to our residents that don't involve the city. I have had a meeting or two with the group looking to help advance what the community is doing with homelessness in our city. Community development would clearly be a part of that. So I think there may be some discretion here, since community development would be very actively involved with if you wanted to look at this as a one-time. I don't know. It's an exception since it is going to directly involve a city department. It's not necessarily as outside.
Their request was for a consultant to design. We're looking at kind of doing something totally different with the homeless situation in our community, with a campus development and doing something totally different. And it requires, like we do with the studies that we're involved with now, it requires some bigger thinking and some coordinated thinking in that process. And so for us to do that, it would require $2,500. You're not able to do that. So anyway.
Have we ever done that where we brought somebody on at $15,000? I mean, traditionally, since I've been on the council, I can't recall anybody ever get more than a $25,000 or $2,500 starting fee.
Yeah. I'm not sure I remember. What we may want to do between now and the 7 o'clock meeting is let me just confirm with Mr. Callow what role they might play in it. Does it belong in the community development area or over here?
I will say that I was told by, I believe it was Mr. Foster, that typically what they do with their organization, when they have a bill like that, their agencies that are involved pay the bill. So we wouldn't be giving them the money directly regardless. We would be a partner in that we would pay this bill if we decide we want to do this. And Mr. Callow was listed on the application, so I know he is fully aware of what was involved, and it could be that if you decide you want to do it, you could put it in charge under his direction, and community development would pay the bill even if we fund it with general fund regular dollars, not federal dollars or state dollars.
My gut feeling on it is it feels like it's something that should not be on the list of outside agencies, period. I mean, it just needs to be something that I think we should discuss it and decide, hey, what is it going to be spent for, and is that something we should spend money on? I mean, I don't know. It doesn't seem like the same thing as us giving it to them for their kind of general fund, quote unquote, and then they use it for the betterment of the community.
It didn't fit in a category like we're typically used to seeing. This one was a little bit
yeah, I just think, unusual. I'm for trying to find some solutions for that. I'm not, I don't know if we just turn that over in this way, but I'm going to make a comment about the idea of adding these numbers, and there may be more here as far as you guys want to do with these things, but my comment is this: since I started on the council, so this is my third budget. I've always sort of had a weird feeling about the outside agency situation, and here's what that weird feeling is that we have a situation where we are giving money to charities, which I think are doing good work. That's work that we don't have to do. I get all that. But my weird feeling is, should we tie it to our budget somehow? So, for instance, this year, we're already looking at spending $4 million more than we're bringing in revenues. We just lost $1 million. It looks like to me we just lost another $1 million of revenues. So we're already in the hole $5 million. I'm not so sure that's a great time to be increasing our charitable giving. I wouldn't do it in my own house. If I was adding debt to my household, I probably wouldn't be increasing my charitable spending. That may be the wrong thing to do, but you have to pay your bills. You know, that is the right thing to do by every measure. So I'm not saying I'm not for raising any of these, but I am trying to say, should we be tying this stuff? And maybe it's in arrears. Maybe we say, because we don't know what our year is going to look like this year. You know, I mean, we're budgeting for it, but we really don't know if the economy starts to slow down 3 months from now. We got 9 months of not so good, but we've already dedicated this. So maybe we say, you know, we can increase it by whatever increase we have in last year's budget, for example. Does that make sense to anybody? Is that? No? All right. So here's the deal. With us being $5 million in the hole, I think it's probably not a great time to be adding to a list of these things. That's
Mr. Crumley,
just
what's
what
our
I'm
fund balance?
Roughly $60 million.
55 at the end of this year, and would have been 50 at the end of last year if our budget would have been correct, and if the economy slows, it would have been 40.
How much debt are we paying off every year, Mr. Crumley?
I think last year was $29 million in principal.
How much debt did we add last year?
Net increase would have been about $45, $46 million.
Okay. So we're not, yeah, we paid off 29, but we added 70 or 80. So it's not really going, I mean, it's not we are in a good spot.
Rick, I think what
only
you're proposing
$15,000
makes some sense, but it's going to take a lot of study to figure this out. I mean, you're going to have to reevaluate everything we do, and I don't think we can do it tonight or tomorrow night or whatever. I would suggest that we accept Mr. Shacklett's proposals, and then we do a study on this to see how some of this is allocated and where it should be allocated. And could you put it on a sliding scale depending on your debt and the city's income? But I don't think we can do it tonight. I think we need to go on and do what we need to take care of business, and then we can study it, because you bring up some good points.
Well, and I think the biggest point that I think is brought up that, and Mr. Lyons knows, we've talked about this for going on 12 years or 10 years now, or feels so much longer, that, you know, we don't necessarily get into what I call deficit spending, but we do get into deficit budgeting. And, you know, there's a big difference, because I think it's 8 out of the last 10 years we've added to fund balance. We budget to use fund balance, but we don't use that. So in terms of the household, that would be that I tell my wife that this year X number of expenses are going to be for this, and she can't use that to remodel or buy furniture, and then all of a sudden at the end of the year I don't spend money on all those expenses, and she looks at me going, well, I could have spent it on that. So from an accounting standpoint, we've got to figure a better way to budget, where if we're budgeting $5 million in fund balance, then it would be nice to know, well, at the end of the year, we're going to spend $5 million in fund balance if everything is as bad as it gets, but not that every year we don't touch that and we add to it. So we actually, you know, I think last year we budgeted $4.5 million to go into fund balance, but we actually put $2 million above that back into fund balance. So it was actually, is that right, Aaron? I don't know what the total number was. It was like a $6 million swing so we've got to find a better way that if we're going to budget it, we need to spend it, not say that, well, does that make sense?
It does, and Mr. Crumley did some quick work today to take a look back over the last 7 years to look at, you know, the performance, and, you know, overall in that time frame, you know, we're within 1% of our revenue projections. It's pretty tight. On the expenditure side, there's about a 5% swing, but a good part of that is explained by some of the capital projects. We talked to Mr. Lowlance today. You know, we want to extend the Greenway to Barfield Crescent Park. I've shared with you in the past the process to acquire right-of-way from using the TDOT process. Some of those steps and delays are completely out of our hands. We're incredibly frustrated by it. We waited on TDOT, and now we're waiting on the Corps of Engineers So we budgeted to, build the Greenway this year, and guess what? We didn't do it because the Corps of Engineers has not given us a green light yet. So there would have been a multi-million-dollar expense in this year's budget that's not going to happen. Now, there's an offsetting revenue that doesn't happen as well, but we understand, some of the frustration. I know it does look a little funny when you say we've got the fund balance appropriation and every year we add to it. And meeting with Mr. Lorenz today, we're going to try to take a little bit more, put some data to it, and try to explain to you what's happened and see.
Yeah, and I think that's where, from my standpoint on the financial side, I think Aaron would laugh at this. In school, it was always, well, if you can't figure it out, just stick it in retained earnings. That's the good place to put it. Well, that's the hole where everything goes. And so what we don't need to get into is, well, if we can't figure it out, let's just put it to fund balance. And so
we understand this question gets asked frequently. I think the city's financial performance has been outstanding. We've consistently delivered budgets that weren't in the black. We talked about 8 of the 10 years we didn't use fund balance. One of the years that we did use fund balance was for the purchase of the conference center land. One year was the year the recession hit. I know that Moody's just upgraded the city financially. We're at the 17th step on an 18-point scale, and they pointed to the city's strong financial management. So we understand
it's much better to be talking about how much is in the fund balance instead of talking about how much isn't in the fund balance. And so I think that's a good part to be in, but at the same time, when you see that number go up, that's the number that is alarming. But so we're on outside agencies.
Yeah, let me speak to that just a moment, because when I read a list of stuff, I'm not trying to say that this is Christmas and I'm Santa Claus. In making these proposals, when I look at outside agencies, because I've served on the boards of a lot of different organizations, a few $1,000s makes significant difference in our community with these volunteer outside agencies, because they're leveraged by volunteer hours doing work that probably is either overlooked or underdone by other groups in our community or by our government. So a few $1,000s makes a significant difference in that. And I just think, helping these organizations be successful and to leverage what they do in our community to do a better job and is money well spent, and it's just a few $1,000s. Now, I guess everyone we can pick individual organizations apart, but as I've talked to each one of these groups that I've talked to you about, they're in need of money, and a few $1,000s makes a big difference in their budgets, and it's. I think it's. I would encourage you to consider what we propose.
The total, Ms. Wright, I have 30,500. Is that right? Or
Did you ask?
Ms. Tucker, is that what
30,000
in addition?
She was trying to put them in as we went
Okay.
along.
I've got 28,500.
Okay.
30. Yeah, I had 30.
Well, I think you had how much, Bill?
I had 30,000, around 30,000.
Yeah, and I think-
I don't have anything for the
Well,
homes.
there would be the journey home at the end would, I think, put it to 30,500, but we can work on that after the meeting.
And it's time for the ludicrous guy to speak in again, I guess. I don't think it's my right to take anybody's tax dollars in this room and give them to the charity of my choice. I think that's your responsibility to give it to the charities of your choice and support those charities. Those that are doing good work should be rewarded, but it's not the government's job, and it's not my right to tax you and take your money and give it to the charity of my choice. As much as I love every one of our charities, you're all important. You all play an important role, but that's not government's role. If it's the government's responsibility, then the government needs to take it over and run it. But if the service can't be done by the private sector, maybe that's a government responsibility, but it is not my right to take anybody's money and give it away to somebody who I like. And I like everybody on this list. I can name a few that aren't on here. I guess the American Red Cross, the American Heart Association. I mean, the list goes on and on. The list is endless of good causes. But for me to give people's money away, there's something inherently wrong with that. And I think the $2,500, which we give them on the initial Contribution is for recognition. It's not to sustain their operation. It's not our responsibility for them to become successful because we continually give them money, because that's an endless string of I wants and I needs. Everybody says they want more. Nobody came back this year and said, I want less money. Everybody came back and said, I want as much or more. I think we ought to freeze it where it's at and not give any more money than what we're already giving. And I think that's still a very generous heart of you guys who feel like you have the right to take people's money and give it away to the charities of your choice. But I just philosophically disagree with the whole concept, but I understand the importance of what role it does play in some of these organizations as well.
As our city grows, so will the needs of our people. I know, Mr. Smotherman, you were saying taking the taxpayers' money for these organizations. A lot of the taxpayers are volunteers in a lot of these organizations we're talking about. If the money does not come from us, then our government, our city government, we're going to be millions of dollars in the hole because some of these agencies, we need to provide the services for. And our administration costs will be just skyrocketed if we do not fund some of these outside agencies. So I kind of got a different take on it here again. As our city grows, the needs of the people are going to grow, and we have a lot of volunteers. Some of these committees, some of these organizations I have been volunteering on, and we have a lot of people in our community that gives a lot of volunteer hours to these organizations. I would hate to see, for two reasons, us ever get rid of these organizations that we are helping, because here again it's a need that the people need. And another thing, our administrative costs with the city is going to go into millions of dollars because we're going to have to provide some of these services. I mean, and I also see what you're saying.
Yes, so I'm trying to do a little bit of math here and make sure it makes sense. So if I back out the CVB dollars from the current proposed numbers, I think my phone's ringing. Sorry, I had my calculator up. So I think 209, 2056. So we're already got, without the CVB dollars included, we've already got in place here for budgeted over last year a 9% increase, about $152,000 or $192,000 more than what we did to agencies last year. Is that correct?
No. What you're counting in there would be the library, who we fund at what they request, because there's a formula between the city and the county.
Okay, so what else do I need to back out of that
The outside
number?
agencies are budgeted exactly the same as last year. We don't increase it. That's up to y'all to
The
do.
only increases
Okay.
you would see
All
are
right, so
these
is
right
these
here.
top line items basically is the only thing that's
Exactly.
going to be, all right, that's what I was trying to figure out.
We don't make any changes
Okay.
without your
Yeah,
recommendations.
good. That's what I was trying to figure out. Good. So what's the total dollars of just the bottom line, the outside agency piece of this? Backing out library, CVB, et cetera.
$30,000
That's
plus
the
about
additional.
these, yeah, $30,000 plus those.
Well, no, 30,000 increase. What's the?
He's pulling it up.
Let me speak to something that, all of these organizations, you're familiar enough to know that this is not their budget. We're not funding these organizations with our money, and it's not the entire. They are all fundraisers. They go out and raise money to supplement their budget, to make their budget. This is extremely, in some cases, extremely small amounts of money related to their budget. So what this does, if you'd look at some of the requests, it enhances our spurs some additional effort in our community by having those dollars available to these organizations. It's an investment. It is an investment by our city in the work of volunteer agencies to continue to do more and to step up their game or reach an area that's presently not being reached. So again, it's all in linguistics or in the way we phrase things, but we're not providing for these outside agencies their entire budget. This is just an incentive for them to look at, when we increase their budgets, it's to do something more or to help them provide a service in an area that they're not. Read some of the applications. They're doing additional services to what they're providing, or looking to do something more. So, I think that's a fair reflection of what, when we increase money that they're requesting, or they have offered a budget request to us. What are you going to do with the money? It's no different than what we talked about with the hotel tax situation. It's not just that we increase taxes, but what are you going to do with the money? And if you look at each of these requests, what they're going to do additionally with the money is extreme, in my evaluation, something very positive. And it's not everybody's getting a full ride or a full ticket. It's those people that we, as we evaluate them, that this is an incentive dollar for them to kind of do more. And I don't think anybody, would you really want to take all of this money away and just provide, if it's a good thing, they're going to sustain themselves by fundraising on their own, and every dollar has to be raised out of our community? There's a lot of things that would not have been accomplished in our community if that was the way we looked at it. Government has a role to incentivize some of these things to be done, to get it off the ground, or to enhance services in our community that may not be done by the private sector or may not be able to get started on their own financially. So to me, that is part of government's role. It's not take all these nonprofits and have them, if it's going to live on its own. That's a pretty cold-hearted way to look at how nonprofits function, to me, at least the way I look at it.
The total, if you leave off the chamber up,
Yeah.
the total that we give to outside agencies, including tourism, is $263,390. Of that number, $134,500 are tourism related, which we've always considered coming out of the hotel motel tax.
So what does that leave us with?
263,390 is the minus the 134,500.
So it's basically 130,000.
About 128,900
Yes,
is what we're giving.
This is just kind of the math that I would, as an example, a $30,000 increase on $130,000 is 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% increase. If you just look at that bottom line piece of it, when I was talking about kind of tying it to something, I would feel like this year, if we're looking at arrears, we did exceed revenues, which should mean we should be able to give a little bit more this year, than what we did last year. But we probably didn't exceed by 30% or 20. Sorry, it was 30,000, 22 or 3%. So, in my way of thinking about things, as far as tying this to something to the health of our city. Yes, is there an investment? I think so. Do I understand the investment that we make in every one of these? Probably not. As far as the value of it, I do appreciate it and understand there's a big value to it. But should we be increasing it by 20% when we're not really growing at 20%? I guess is what I'm more questioning. And in a budget year that we're already expecting to spend $5 million more dollars than we bring in. That's the only problem. The only
question, Rick, is that the relative dollars, talking percentages, it sounds amazing. 28% is, or 23%.
30,000.
But $30,000, relatively speaking, will pass in our consent agenda. Significantly more money than,
I understand that.
So this, this kind of, these are very small dollars compared to what, and it makes significant difference. $30,000 to these organizations leveraged into all the volunteer work that's being done and like I say, the enhanced opportunities that they're going to, services and the quality of life of our community is very little. To give that to outside agencies and allow them to leverage that and to multiply that into services in our community, I don't think it's fair to look at percentages as much as is the significant dollars.
I guess if I don't tie it to something, I wonder, how do we come up with the number? Not just the amount of increase, but how do we come up with what's appropriate?
What you want to do, if you tie it to a percentage, then what percentage are you going to use?
I don't know.
Well, see, there you go.
Yeah,
See,
yeah,
so I think percentages are going to be a trap for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly, we could give away a lot more.
Well,
It would be still good.
I look at it, I'm just going down through the list, and, you know, I don't want to pick individual organizations out, but, you know, when I look at just the ones that are law enforcement, you know, Rutherford County Crime Stoppers, Domestic Violence Program, CASA, Child Advocacy Center, and Sexual Assault Services Program. So I think there's a lot of those things that, even though that they're outside agencies, they're tied and they work directly with our city every single day. And so some of them are even more, what I would say, part of the city than they probably want to be. You know, we're even looking at the partnership we have with CASA. So I think it's one of those things that you hate to say this, and I tell homeowners this: you're either going to pay for it on the front end or you're going to pay for it on the back end. And if we don't make the investment on the front end to help these organizations, we're going to end up paying for it later on the back end, because we're going to have to end up paying more to take care of some of these issues that they're not taking care of. So. And for anyone who's up here knows I'm not the guy that says, well, we've always done it, so let's keep doing it. But, you know, when you look at Main Street, Oakland's, all of those things, they're huge parts of the city. So, okay, so we've got this list. We've only got a few minutes to get before we have to open. We have our public comment. So, is there anything else on outside agencies? We still are going to have lots of time to discuss this later on. Okay. Any other issues that anyone doesn't want or wants to talk about now, or we can wait till after the public hearing or at the public hearing?
Would you like to talk about salaries increase?
I think it's a good idea. Yeah.
In this case, I'm probably speaking out both sides of my mouth, because I am trying to spend more money than what's been approved or proposed in the budget. My concern is the people on the lower side of the scale, whom I feel are probably struggling, those who are making $25,000 a year and working for this city. They're not getting rich by any means, and they're paying the same amount as the person who's doing pretty well working for our city. And I think that without causing compression, there's an ability to go in and amend the budget rather than giving a 2% straight across the board, because again, it's like the problem with percentages is each year in the past that I've been on the council, we've looked at 3.5%, and I know the pay study last year was supposed to have helped the situation some. I think it may have some. I'm sure it didn't, but the ones at the bottom, I think, are the ones who are suffering the most, and that is who I would like for us to direct our funds towards. And I would make the suggestion that anybody under $35,000, rather than a 2% raise, would receive a 4% raise. Anyone under $70,000, rather than receiving a 2% raise, would get a 3% raise. And anyone over $70,000 would receive the 2% raise as presented. That's not taken from the rich and given to the poor, so it's not Robin Hood. We're giving exactly what those at the top of the scale have suggested. I would assume that if the budget were made out by people who made $25,000 a year, it'd probably come in somewhat different than what it's presented as when you get people who make over $70,000 a year presenting the budget. And I know that it has a expense that comes with it. If it's any way that we could economically meet that amount, I think that would be much better for our employees. An employee who makes $100,000 on that proposal would receive, $100,000 employee would get $2,000. A $50,000 employee, we'd get an additional they'd get an additional $1,000. Under the 2%, under the 3%, they get $1,500, so they get $500 more if they fall between the 35 and 70, if they're a $50,000 employee. And then anybody below that $35,000 mark, let's take the $25,000 employee, if they were to get under the 2%, they would get a $500 raise. While the guy that's making the most money is getting $2,000. If we double that, they would get a $1,000 raise a year, and I think that would make a significant influence on those people's ability to walk into the grocery store and buy that gallon of milk, to buy that loaf of bread, and to buy that gallon of gas at the same price that the guy who's making more money than they are. I'm just trying to help out the people at the bottom of our scale. Doesn't benefit me 1 cent one way or the other, so I'll let y'all decide.
Any discussion?
Mr. Smotherman, I can understand what you're saying. When I came on the council in 2010, these are some of the same feelings I had as far as employees. If we say we are a city that's growing, then why are the majority of our employees at or close to the poverty level? Why are so many of our employees having to go out and get a second job just to make ends meet? And I'm not talking about ends meeting where they're going out and buying fabulous homes, boats, cars, anything like that. I'm just talking about good quality of life, trying to stay above board. And I'm saying, who's actually picking up that 4% that we're talking about? You know, the bottom line is we're increasing our insurance by 4%. So really the bottom line is, who's really hurting? What are these people at the lower end, what are they really taking home? That's the bottom line. How much are they taking home? And I agree with that. The face of our community that's drawing all these people into the community, when people look at Murfreesboro, when they look at the pulse of the community, they are looking at these people that are out here beating the streets every day, making us look good. They're looking at the people who are keeping us safe. They're looking at the people that are picking up our garbage. You name it. This is the face of Murfreesboro. These people are the face of Murfreesboro. And I think we need to reward them because, like you said, they're going to the same grocery stores we're going to. So they are actually the face of Murfreesboro. So I think I agree with that. I think they'll never catch up. They'll never come to catching up with some of these high salaries. And I think we at least need to say, hey, you're doing a great job. Wish we could do more, but I think we need to reward the ones at the bottom. I've always said that since I took my seat in 2010.
So I'll come up with something in the middle, maybe. I'm trying to think of the right word here. I don't think skeptical is the right word, but what I'm bothered by about the idea of doing what he's talking about is that if we did that for 5 years, we would be our pay ranges would be starting to get certainly compressed and out of market for what those bottom third or half or what for the number of jobs that we have. We'd certainly be starting to get significantly out of market. Okay, I mean if you did it for 10 years, you'd be way out of market just because you'd get outside those ranges, or I guess you'd get topped out that much quicker. So the way that I might, let me say this to you. I mean, one of the things that might be something that we could do, and the MAG study, kind of outline this for us, is that, what we may be able to do is if we all say, hey, we'd like to try to address this situation, okay, that maybe if we look at, moving the ranges on some of those jobs, not necessarily moving their salary right now, but moving those ranges up by a certain percentage, that we might get some of the results that we're sort of thinking about here without putting ourselves in a position to be too far out of range and get more compression. Now, another thing that I'll mention that Madeline just brought up to me to us that gave me an idea is that certainly this year, what might be something, and I'm literally brainstorming here. Y'all know that's dangerous, but what if we decrease the amount of increase of the insurance that they absorb? So we take those same things and we say, instead of necessarily going this, because if I'm a family, that's a hard dollar number. If I'm an employee and I'm making $40,000 a year, I know the job that I accepted, and I know that I'm expected to get some raises along the way, and they're probably going to be on percentages. I know that going into the deal. But for me to take on a 4% increase on a $500 insurance bill or whatever, just for easy math, that's the same $20 that somebody at the top end of the scale has to pay. It is a real hard dollar number. And so maybe, what we could do this year.
But that's helping the guy at the top, just like you're helping the guy at the bottom.
It wouldn't change the guy at the top. What I'm saying is the guy, so I didn't make it clear, but what I'm thinking here is, if it's a 4% increase on insurance, 70 and above, they get a 4% increase on their insurance. 35 to 70, they only get a 2% increase on their insurance, and up to 35, you don't pay more. I don't even know if we can do that, but
I don't think you can do it.
But if you get a 2% pay increase and your range moves up, say 4%, yeah, it gives you more room for growth, but the bottom line is you still only got a 2% raise, so you don't get any more money in your pocket than the 2%. And I'm trying to put money in people's pockets rather than, because, and it's, the 4% number on insurance is based on the price of insurance. It's not based on your salary. So there's no relationship at all between those two numbers. I know some guy tried to explain to me, you've gone up 4% and you've only given me a 2% raise, so I've lost 2%. No, you didn't. I mean, you're comparing apples and oranges. So
I'm just saying, if it's $500, that if they didn't have to pay it going from $500 to $520,
are you doing that for?
They saved the $20. No, I'm just.
I mean, if you did it, you'd have to pick a price range of which employees that you would think that would get.
It's a percentage increase.
Well, real quick, and I'm going to try to. We just went through a pay study, and y'all know how hard it was on the pay study. And so I think if we start breaking things down into ranges, we might as well just throw the pay study that we just did out, because we're going to be busting up. What happens if you've got somebody, for instance, I met with a firefighter. He's barely above that $70,000 range, and there's someone right below him that's doing the exact same job that's been here less time. But because that person is below that range, that person is going to go above him.
And I should have included that. You cannot surpass the person in the range above you, which means you could catch them, but you can't go above them.
But do you know how hard that's going to be to try to figure that out?
Well,
that's what HR is for. I mean, they figure it out.
Well, I think we already out of our market here. Okay, go ahead, ma'am.
Well, what I was going to say is we are getting on a dangerous slope when we start breaking people up on pay range salaries. So what about the person who, and I'm the first person who ever graduated from my family to go to college. My parents said, go to college. And what about the person who goes to college, has a ton of student loan debt when they come out of college, and so they get out, they're making a salary that maybe is between that 50 to 70 range, but we're telling them, no, because you're not here, you're not going to get a range. I think what's fair, if we're going to talk about being fair to employees, we've got the pay study. I think what would be fair is to say everybody gets 3%. Smyrna's doing 2%, 2.6%. Rutherford County's doing 1.75. We're ahead of what the market is, and we increase the range. We say we're going to add 3% to the range. So if there's someone that's topped out, they will get a raise. And then I'm not going to support breaking employees up into segments. I think that's I don't think the person who makes $55,000, their job's any less valuable than the person who makes $80,000. So I just think that's
Eddie,
something
could
I'm
you speak
gonna
to a
do.
little bit, because you've thought through this, what about compression?
Well, it
how
actually
you
is,
address
if you take the $100,000 employee, the $50,000, and the $25,000 employee, you're not getting compression because the $100,000 employee, under that theory, would get $2,000. The $50,000 employee would get $1,500, and the $25,000 employee would get $500, which is going to be bumped up to $1,000. So you got $1,000, $1,500, and $2,000. Next year, when you give out the raises, if you gave them all at 2%, their raises would still be compounding and growing, because this whole system that we've got of giving people 3% raises or 4% raises is you're giving the people who need the money the least the most money. They're getting 3% based on their salary, and 3% based on your salary, if you're a $100,000 employee, is $3,000. If you're a $25,000 employee, again, you're back down to
Quick
$750.
question.
I mean,
Don't you think it would be better, instead of paying people a raise based upon what a range is, wouldn't it be better that we now start having the discussion about merit-based pay? That if you've got someone that is below that $35,000 range and they're an all-star employee, then yeah, they get a 4% raise. But if you've got someone that's below that, that's doing the minimum, then, I think you pay people and you
Shane, I
reward
went around
them.
and talked to the firefighters the other day. I went to several stations and stopped in and visited with them and talked to them about my proposal. And when I first went in, I said, listen, here's the deal. We could either take the $950,000, split it up into equal amounts of what we say we've got to increase it. It comes out, if you divide it by the 830 employees, it comes out to a little over $1,100 an employee, and give everybody a bonus check. Everybody gets the same amount. Well, that sounds fair on the top, but the problem with that is it's really going to affect them when they get to the retirement age, because it's a bonus, it's not a pay increase. And so they're wanting to see money on their salary, and I understand that. So we talked about the proposal that I presented. I even called the state comptroller's office and talked to a gentleman there about it, about the compression side of it, because somebody had expressed concerns about compression. And he said, you're not causing compression because the person at the top is still getting more money than the person below. So therefore, you're still having growth within the expansion of your departments. And so
That wouldn't necessarily be true. That would only be true if they were making a certain amount above them, a certain percent
Right.
above them.
Ms. Wright, how many people do we have that make above 100,000? Just a rough number.
I guess about 10,
Out of how many employees?
900.
So
try 70,000 rather than
Yeah,
100,000.
yeah.
I mean, how many do we have over 70,000?
yeah,
71 employees. So, I mean, it's not going to affect a whole lot of people above. I mean, basically what I'm trying to do is get more money to the people at the bottom of our scale, and for the people at the top of the scale, it's only 71 employees that would be affected that get what is proposed in the budget. I know your 3% number is helping everybody, but it's also helping, you're widening the gap every time you do that, because
wouldn't you agree that out of the 900 employees, if we do a 3% and keep everything the same, we're only affecting 81 employees, and so 820
would get 3%.
Right.
And the ones below 33,000 would get 4%. Yes, I understand that.
Yeah. Well, hey, we're bumping up against our public comments, so we can stay tuned later and we can talk about it. So let's go straight into our public comment. So we're going to close this special meeting. So we're going to stand adjourned here, and then we're going to immediately go into opening the special comment section. And I have a list.